Ever wonder what kind of use cases our friends in the Hadoop market are seeing? This week on Big Data and Brews, we thought we'd round up a collection for you. So grab a beer, a pencil, and a notepad for this week's special use case episode.
What are some of the most exciting use cases you see with the customers, especially around those integration scenarios you just mentioned?
Well, there are some very mundane use cases that are exciting to the customers. Let me start there, like operational data store collapsing. So I find most customers have hundreds to thousands. If you're talking about a big Fortune 500 company, they will literally have thousands of copies of the same data.
Yeah.
For compliance reasons, usually.
Yeah.
Different teams can have different pieces of data, and they want to silo them from each other to have zero regulatory risk.
Yeah.
And our data lake architecture allows us to basically say, you know what, you may have 3,000 files in Hadoop data lake, but at least it's just a data lake.
Yeah.
And sometimes it turns out we can collapse the redundancy down to, it's just really 3 copies of the data. Usually you can, because we can do column level encryption with a columnar store, and we can say this guy is, based on login, is allowed to decrypt the column, this guy is not. And we do a lot of format preserving encryption. You can use the column to do analytics, it's just not the real, like a social security number is not the real one.
Right, you do
it's
like
just a unique one per
or
person.
something,
Now, so the mundane use cases are collapsing out all these redundant copies of data. That saves people a lot of money. The sexy use cases are data science. Like I just spoke to our head of data science before coming to meet you, and he found, for example, I can't say which customer this is with, but in healthcare, he built a new algorithm in Hadoop. So he onboarded all these structured data sources. Forget Hadoop for unstructured data. This is all databases, and then some office-style documents like PDFs of X-rays and things like that from hospitals.
Maybe doctor notes, yeah. Who knows?
So you bring all this data in, you do some natural language processing, you do some pharmacy history data analysis, and he found that he could write an algorithm, literally in R, he could write an algorithm that found the relationship between diseases and drugs. So these are the drugs people take, and these are the diseases they have, and these are the time correlation between them. And he started asking questions of this healthcare provider's doctor, experts. Like, he said, there's something very strange going on. It seems like anyone who has atherosclerosis, calcification of the arteries, there's a very strong correlation between them and taking flu medication. And the doctor said, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. And they started looking into it, and a week later the doctors came back and said, you know what? The calcification gets really, really bad for someone on the flu. The arteries harden for a short period of time, even worse than when they were hardening in the natural state of that person's health before. And they will soften again a little bit after the flu passes, but during the flu, the arteries lock down. And it's an immune response, and the person is at huge risk of heart attack. So we figured out, together with this healthcare provider, that you could actually say, if someone has atherosclerosis and they come to you with the flu, you need to treat that as an emergency situation, because if you don't get that flu dealt with, they could have a heart attack. More importantly, is anyone with atherosclerosis should just get a flu vaccine every year and not be at risk of catching the flu. Then he found something much more interesting, which is HIV positive patients were taking prescription-only hyperfluoridated toothpaste in huge volumes, and no doctor could tell him why. And it turns out that the drug cocktails to treat HIV weaken the teeth. And dentists step in and prescribe hyperfluoridated toothpaste.
Interesting. Well, isn't that wonderful what you find out about data, things in data? Now, you're working on this, and you're like one of the really, really early guy in the Hadoop space, and you're working on this, and where was that moment where you had to pinch yourself, and I can't believe people doing this with the software I wrote like so many years ago? What's the most amazing use case you saw?
Well, not really. So first was not the use case. Once I started doing Hadoop evangelism outside of Yahoo, by the way, the first Hadoop tutorial delivered anywhere was in ApacheCon in 2008 or 2009. I'm forgetting, but this was in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Was delivered by me.
Yeah.
And
was
it
there.
was sponsored. It was sponsored by Cloudera.
Right.
So
right.
Christophe Basilia, Aaron Kimball,
Right.
Tom White, all of those actually
Didn't
were.
we go in the evening for the... Anyhow, we should not talk
We
about
should not talk about that. Yes, yes. The French Quarter thing. Let's push that out. So, but really, I was in Usenix the year after that, and my tutorial proposal got accepted there. The next door, there was a Solaris performance tuning tutorial going on with Richard McDougall.
Yeah.
And Richard McDougall has written, Solaris performance tuning books all about Solaris. A really great guy. His tutorials had something like 6 people attending them, and my tutorial next door had something like 30 people attending. That's the point where I basically realized
something is shifting.
Exactly. The Usenix 2009. This was in San Diego. And among the attendees in my tutorial, there were 3 people representing all 3 different 3-letter agencies.
Yeah.
And that was basically, okay, what have we done?
Saving the world.
Saving the world, yes.
Yeah.
That's right. So that's where, and recently actually, my daughter took a part in the Synopsis Science Fair here in South Bay. And so I went to drop her there, and I just took a look at what all kids were doing, right, from 7th grade to 12th.
And I brought my Brews drops.
There was actually a kid from the 7th grade kid who did, what was his title? Effect of number of computers on the computation time. So he basically took a MapReduce job, and he basically said, if I run this on 3 machines, if I run this on 10 machines, if I run this on 20 machines, how much does the computation time changes? So he discovered that, it goes down for some time and then it basically goes back up, right? So this was all done using Amazon AWS and Hadoop. And I was basically...
What was the name of that
7th
kid?
grade.
We should hire them.
I actually was tempted to make him an internship offer right there.
Yeah.
I don't know about underage recruiting or anything like that,
What are people doing? Is it different in like what people do in the US versus in Europe? I mean, use case wise, or are there buckets?
Yeah, I'd say the US is probably still ahead in terms of the maturity of the customer base, although, we have actually a significant number of customers in these other countries. One great use case in Japan is it's actually a beverage company. So this is one of the biggest beverage companies, beer and whiskey in Japan.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, they have some pretty cool use cases. So I think you look at the standard kind of marketing use cases that people do with Hadoop. They have all of those, but they also have these really cool vending machines where they're doing image
Japanese
detection
thing.
and they have a video camera that's looking at you and kind of recommending a beverage to you when you walk up to it. So
based on what you used before.
I think they kind of look at your image and compare it to other people that had similar characteristics, things like that. So that's a pretty cool use case. Yeah.
That's so Minority Report, where you basically, based on your, like what was it, Retina, get the advertisement. Well, I guess we live in the future, huh? That's amazing.
Yeah, we do.
What are some of the use cases you're seeing with the customers? Like, what are your favorite one?
My favorite one. My favorite one is actually, it's not going to be one of the more popular use cases, but the Aadhaar project in India, actually. So,
can you tell us more about it? I think that's just a ginormous project.
Yeah, it's a really cool one too, and it's really valuable. I mean, in terms of what it's doing in that country. So India has over 1 billion people living in the country. I think it's something like 1.25 billion people. And one of the challenges there is that about half of the population doesn't even have an identity. There is no, social security number or anything like that, and that prevents these people from opening bank accounts. It prevents them from getting medical care. It prevents them from getting government services, government aid, things like that. It also encourages a lot of fraud in the overall system, right? And so What the Aadhaar project is doing is it's basically building the world's largest biometric database. And the idea is to provide every resident of India an identification so they can get government aid and medical services and open a bank account and do commerce and things like that. And it's lifting a lot of people out of poverty.
Yeah,
right.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it's up to about 750 million people already in the database. I think it's about 10 petabytes of data. And so for every person, you have the person's the photo of the face. You have the 10 fingerprints, the 2 iris scans. So you have all that information for every one of these people. And then it's not just collecting that information and storing it. It's also enabling every point of service in India to also be able to verify that identity, because now you need the bank and every other service provider to be able to check your identity.
Right.
And so that's a system that needs to respond within 200 milliseconds at very, very high load in terms of transactions per second. So we're really happy that we're powering that from the back end, from a Hadoop and database standpoint. So that's one of the projects I'm most excited about. I think advertising and marketing are pretty common use cases across the board, and
is that more in the ad companies, or is that more kind of the traditional big companies trying to understand their customers, or?
It's actually both. So, you look at some of our customers, like the Rubicon project, which is the largest ad exchange in the U.S. in terms of audience reach, and they're doing 90 billion ad auctions every day.
Okay. Wow.
And each of those auctions is probably a dozen or more bids. So all these bids are, we're talking about trillions of events every month that are processed in the cluster, and they, in the MapR environment, and they predict the prices that the auctions are going to settle at, and all sorts of things like that. But then if you look at many other customers that we have in across telco and retail, they're doing. These are customers that have tens to hundreds of millions of end users or end customers. And they're doing everything from better ad targeting to churn analysis, all those types of use cases.
What kind of product enhancements does that drive for you guys? Like, where is it? You touched a little bit on the low latency requirements, but where do you really see Hadoop as it is today? You said a little bit expanding into kind of the, near real-time-ish production use cases. What other functionality dimensions are driven by those use cases?
Well, I think the customers that are doing these things, and I think you mentioned earlier how you see a lot of our customers are kind of doing big deployments that are really impactful to their business, right? When a company wants to do that, they need a set of kind of enterprise grade dependability characteristics, right? So, they want true high availability, right? One that self-heals automatically. They want real consistent snapshots. They want disaster recovery across data centers. And so, every Hadoop vendor now says, well, we have those things, and we've added those things, we've caught up with MapR, right? But there's a difference between kind of building those into the architecture and doing just something in a marketing checkbox, right?
Like adding it.
Yeah,
it's the Tower of Pisa, and we just put something on.
We added it, right? Yeah. And so, I mean, let's take an example of snapshots, right? So MapR, we've provided snapshots from day one, much like you would see in any other in an enterprise storage or an enterprise database, right? The ability to go back in time. Let's say a user accidentally deleted data, or you had an outage and you wanted to go back to a consistent point in time. So it is something that enterprises expect, right? You wouldn't buy a NAS or a database if you couldn't go back and do point-in-time recovery, right? Well, MapR is the only Hadoop distribution that provides that from a Hadoop standpoint, right? So, in our competitors, they've tried to add that to HDFS, and the result is really inconsistent snapshots, or what they sometimes call fuzzy snapshots. But I mean, people don't. Yeah,
that's a nice marketing term, by the way.
It's great. You don't.
It's it's a fuzzy snapshot.
It's more or less consistent. It's sometimes consistent. That
let's
would be the
hope
right
it is consistent.
Let's hope it is, right?
The whole thing just crashed. Let's hope.
Yeah. And as the Hadoop market has matured over the last year, and will continue to mature over the next year or 2 years, people stop buying those those arguments, right? They don't compromise when they buy a storage system or a database. they're not going to compromise when they buy a
Yeah.
Hadoop environment.
Let's come back to the recommenders. What are the kind of use cases you see people using?
Recommenders are just amazingly ubiquitous lately. A friend of mine, Mahout co-contributor Robin O'Neill, just recently showed me that the new Google Maps is almost entirely based on recommenders. There's way too much stuff to show on any map.
Yeah.
There's a massive amount of stuff. You wouldn't be able to read it. And so what it does is, based on what you've done lately, what you've clicked on, what you've typed in, it selects which things it wants to show you. So I do this actually now in my talks. I show what happens if I search for a restaurant by name near our office, and it shows all these restaurants in the same price range, roughly the same cuisine or stuff. Then I search for the MapR offices. All the restaurants go away, and all these high-tech offices around MapR show up. It knows which sort of thing I'm doing. And in fact, the demo used to work better, because now it knows that I search for restaurants in that neighborhood. So it starts showing me.
It mixes the technology with the restaurants.
That's right. And so it's learned already some aspects of what I like. And there are many things that it does. It'll de-emphasize roads if you're a bicyclist or you're on mass transit, and countervailing approaches will be done to different scales that might show you more roads.
Is there a data privacy issue with this?
There are data privacy issues everywhere.
Yeah.
And people really don't recognize how ubiquitous they are. Google has a pretty darn good track record, and they've taken a lot of efforts. So ultimately, just like search histories, those are sensitive. And even though they're not legally sensitive, Google is doing the right thing by treating them as very sensitive and being pretty careful. We've used Google as a partner with the Google Compute Engine, and I've been very impressed. For instance, the disks that you get on the virtual instances are encrypted by default. In fact, I don't know how to defeat that.
Yeah.
And so if you just do a toy example, the data at rest is encrypted.
Yeah.
And maybe you should do a better key management so it's always changing or whatever, but at least the zero state, the simplest case, is done well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there's always issues about privacy. There are really subtle things you can do with big data, which is the whole value.
Yeah.
But those things can also be used to invade privacy.
Yeah.